Class is a sociological concept to interrogate forms of inequality. Class in this sense relates to the material inequalities of who owns what, where people live, what schools they go to and the like, but also more cultural aspects and symbolic aspects around consumption, around morals, tastes and values. Class is certainly not a popular concept in mainstream society. It's largely denied as a thing by our politicians, and really the term class only comes up when, ironically, politicians talk about a class war, when people argue for redistribution of wealth. So it's a kind of term that's not used a lot in mainstream society, even though inequality is discussed more broadly. Class is therefore a concept to help us kind of critically engage with those inequalities. It's also kind of implicit in our day-to-day relations and language. If you use a term like snob or yuppie, hipster, bogan, even if you call something classy, these things have relations to those morals and tastes and values that I was talking about. So class in this sense is a specific sociological way of thinking about forms of inequality, inequalities that are both material, cultural and symbolic. In this week's topic, we'll be looking at Marx, who's the kind of foundation of class concepts, looking at the work of Weber, who brought in the notion of status, and also talking about Pierre Bourdieu, who's probably the most prominent contemporary cultural theorist of class. One of the reasons that class doesn't seem to be a popular concept in Australian society in general is the historical understanding that Australia is an egalitarian society, and that our history was kind of a working class paradise where people could come here and just, through use of their body in the gold rushes or whatever, be able to make a good living. This notion of egalitarianism has kind of dominated the way that many people think about Australia, and there's a kind of minimisation of the way that inequality works as this kind of myth dominates. Another concept here that kind of dominates the way that we think about this stuff is the idea of meritocracy, where here the idea is if you work hard, if you make the right choices, if you're talented enough, things will go well for you. Now this can be the case, and the media is really good at pointing out individuals that do kind of move upwardly mobile and have quite amazing achievements. But on a broad economy of scale, we know that things like the place that you live, the education and occupation of your parents, even things like how many books are in your household have real effects on the possibility of doing well at school and doing well in the education systems. In fact, there's been recent studies that shows you can almost plot a graph by how many books in a household, for instance, map onto how well people do at school, regardless of what those books are. So again, this is aspects of class relations, the materiality of what's in a household, the ability to pay for people to enter private school or not, and also more subtly, an affinity with what's in the education system. Those with well-educated parents are much more likely to have an affinity with what's taught in high schools, in higher education, than those that have parents that don't have those qualifications and experience in higher education. So while class is fundamentally something to interrogate inequality, increasingly today we also think about class as interrogating forms of privilege. And one of the things we're interested in increasingly is why there's a development of what's called the transnational capitalist class. In this sense, we know now there's basically maybe a quarter of the world's wealth is siphoned off into offshore tax havens. It's very hard to track. We actually don't have really good figures on wealth, but it means that literally trillions of dollars are kind of hidden in personal tax havens. You've probably all heard also the figures of 8 people in the world now have more wealth than the bottom 50%. So privilege here is something that's increasingly interrogated in the notion of class, where access to institutions, whiteness and having lots of money obviously provide you with lots more privilege.